You actually brought the gloves.
Of course, wouldn't be a party without them.
All right, let's hear something. Ready? Oh, here we go.
You're gonna play for us? With those gloves? Prepare to be amazed.
Shh, everyone, he's gonna play.
The grand ballroom looked brighter than the stars outside. Crystal lights hung from the high ceiling, shining over polished marble floors. Every table was covered with white flowers and expensive decorations. Soft music played through hidden speakers while waiters carried trays filled with elegant food and sparkling drinks. Guests dressed in costly suits and long evening gowns smiled as cameras flashed around them. It was one of the biggest charity events of the year. Some of the richest business owners, famous artists, and respected community leaders had gathered in one place. Everyone wanted to be seen. Everyone wanted to be part of the evening. At the center of the ballroom stood a beautiful black grand piano. It was more than an instrument. It was part of the night's entertainment. The event schedule promised that a world-famous pianist would perform before the main charity auction began. Many guests walked past the piano and admired it. "I heard the performer has played in the finest concert halls," one guest said. "I can't wait to hear the music," another replied. Near the back of the ballroom, someone moved quietly through the crowd without attracting attention. It was the hotel's oldest janitor. He wore a clean gray work uniform with a small name tag that had become faded over the years. His shoes showed signs of long hours of walking. His hands were rough from years of hard work. He pushed a small cleaning cart beside him, stopping now and then to pick up tiny pieces of paper or wipe away fingerprints from the polished walls. Most people never looked at him twice. Some guests stepped around him without saying a word. Others acted as if he wasn't even there. The janitor did not seem bothered. He simply smiled politely whenever someone passed by. He greeted the hotel staff kindly and thanked them whenever they moved aside to let him clean. Everyone working at the hotel respected him. They knew he was honest, patient, and never complained, even after long shifts. One young waiter whispered to another, "He has worked here longer than almost anyone." The other waiter nodded. "I've never seen him lose his temper." The janitor heard them but said nothing. He simply continued his work. Across the ballroom, the billionaire host greeted important guests with confidence. Reporters asked for photographs while business partners waited for handshakes. The charity event had taken months to organize. Everything needed to be perfect. Then something unexpected happened. One of the event organizers hurried toward the billionaire with worry written across his face. "There is a problem," he said quietly. The billionaire frowned. "What happened?" "The pianist has been delayed. There was an accident on the highway. The driver says they may not arrive for quite some time." The billionaire looked at his watch. "How long?" "No one knows." The organizer lowered his voice. "The guests are already asking when the performance will begin." The billionaire took a slow breath. "We cannot leave hundreds of people waiting." He looked around the ballroom, thinking of another solution. Nearby, guests had already started talking among themselves. "Where is the pianist? I thought the concert started already. This delay is embarrassing." The conversations grew louder. Some people checked their phones. Others walked toward the buffet tables. The excitement slowly turned into impatience. Meanwhile, the janitor continued cleaning near the piano. He gently wiped a small mark from its glossy surface before stepping away. His eyes rested on the piano for only a second. There was something unusual about the way he looked at it. Not with surprise, not with curiosity. It was almost like seeing an old friend after many years. Before anyone noticed, he quietly returned to collecting empty glasses left on a nearby table. A group of wealthy guests stood only a few steps away. They had been laughing loudly all evening. One of them noticed the janitor walking past. With a grin, he pointed toward the piano. "Looks like we found tonight's performer." The others laughed. Another guest joined the joke. "Yes, let him play." More laughter followed. Someone raised a glass and called out loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Play this and I'll marry you." The words echoed across the room. Several guests burst into louder laughter. Even people who had not heard the beginning of the joke started smiling after seeing everyone else's reaction. The billionaire turned toward the sound. He smiled, amused by the unexpected entertainment. The janitor stopped walking. He slowly turned around. For a moment, everyone expected him to laugh along with them. Instead, he simply looked at the piano. His face remained calm. There was no anger, no embarrassment, no sadness, only quiet thought. One guest spoke again. "Come on, give us a show." Another added, "Maybe you'll surprise us." The words carried more humor than kindness. Several hotel employees looked uncomfortable. The young waiter who had spoken earlier quietly shook his head. "This isn't right," he whispered. His friend agreed. But neither of them felt able to interrupt wealthy guests. The room became strangely quiet. The janitor gently placed the cleaning cloth onto his cart. He straightened his sleeves. Then he walked toward the piano. Not quickly, not slowly, just calmly. Every step caught more attention. Guests who had been talking stopped their conversations. Phones lowered. Even the photographers became curious. "What is he doing?" someone whispered. "I think he's actually going to sit down." "No way." The billionaire folded his arms with a smile that suggested he still expected another joke. The janitor reached the piano bench. He stood beside it without touching the keys. His fingers rested lightly against the polished wood. For just a moment, he closed his eyes. No one understood why. The ballroom had become completely silent. The laughter had disappeared. The only sound left was the soft hum of the lights above. The janitor opened his eyes again. He slowly pulled the bench closer. Then he sat down with quiet confidence. His hands remained in his lap. He looked at the piano as if remembering something from another life. A memory no one else in the room could see. The billionaire exchanged amused looks with the guests standing beside him. "This should be interesting," one of them whispered. Across the ballroom, several hotel workers stopped what they were doing. The kitchen doors remained half open as cooks peeked inside. Even the security guards watched from the entrance. No one knew what would happen next. The janitor lifted his hands. His fingers moved toward the keys with surprising care. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. It looked as though every movement came naturally. The room held its breath. Not a single guest spoke. The billionaire's smile remained, but even he leaned forward slightly, curious to see what would happen. The janitor let his fingertips rest lightly on the piano. Then, with complete calm, he pressed the very first key. The first note floated through the ballroom so softly that some people almost wondered if they had imagined it. Then came another note, and another. Within a few seconds, the quiet sound grew into a smooth melody that filled every corner of the room. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Every note carried confidence, patience, and feeling. The guests who had laughed only moments earlier slowly lowered their glasses. A woman standing near the front stopped recording a short video for social media because she found herself simply listening. The young waiter stared at the janitor with wide eyes. I didn't know he could play," he whispered. His coworker quietly replied, "Neither did I." The billionaire's smile slowly faded. He had expected random notes, awkward mistakes, or maybe a funny attempt that would entertain the crowd for a minute. Instead, the man sitting at the piano looked completely at home. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His hands moved across the keys with gentle control. His fingers seemed to know exactly where every note belonged. The melody became richer. It rose and fell like a calm conversation, sometimes soft enough to make people lean closer, sometimes strong enough to fill the huge ballroom without effort. Nobody spoke. The expensive dinner, the decorations, the cameras, and even the planned schedule no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was the music. One elderly guest quietly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. "I haven't heard anyone play like this in years," he murmured. His wife nodded without taking her eyes off the piano. "It feels real." Across the room, hotel employees slowly gathered near the entrance. Housekeepers, servers, reception workers, and even several chefs stood together. Most of them had worked beside the janitor for years. They knew him as the man who always arrived before sunrise, the man who greeted everyone with kindness, the man who never missed a day of work. But none of them had ever seen this side of him. One housekeeper quietly said, "Every lunch break, he used to disappear for a few minutes." Another replied, "I thought he just wanted some peace and quiet." They looked at each other. Now they wondered if those quiet moments had been spent with music. The janitor continued playing. His face remained peaceful. He did not look at the audience. He did not seem interested in their reactions. It was almost as though he had forgotten they were there. For him, there was only the piano. Each note carried a memory that no one else could see. The room seemed warmer now. People who had been strangers a few minutes ago stood shoulder to shoulder, listening together. Even children who had come with their parents stopped moving around and sat quietly on nearby chairs. One little girl tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. "Why is everyone so quiet?" Her mother smiled softly. "Because sometimes music says more than words." The little girl looked toward the piano again. She became silent too. The billionaire slowly stepped closer. He wanted to see the janitor's hands. There had to be some explanation. Maybe the man had taken lessons years ago. Maybe he knew one simple song. But the longer he listened, the more impossible those ideas became. This was not ordinary playing. Every movement was smooth. Every change in rhythm came naturally. The janitor never looked confused. He never searched for the next note. His hands simply moved with quiet certainty. Several guests took out their phones again. This time they were not recording as a joke. They wanted to remember the moment. A guest whispered, "Who is he?" Another answered, "I have no idea. Has anyone seen him before? I thought he worked here." "He does. But how can someone like him play like this?" No one had an answer. The music continued. It became brighter for a few moments, almost joyful. Then it turned gentle again, carrying a feeling that made many people think about their own lives. Some remembered family members they had not visited in years. Others remembered dreams they had left behind while chasing busy careers. The notes seemed different to every listener, yet everyone felt something. Near the stage, one of the event organizers quietly shook his head. "We don't even need the scheduled performer anymore." Another organizer smiled. "I don't think anyone would leave if he kept playing all night." The billionaire heard those words. He looked around the ballroom. The guests who had complained about the delay earlier were no longer impatient. Nobody checked the time. Nobody wanted the music to end. For the first time that evening, the charity event felt less like a business gathering and more like people sharing one unforgettable experience. The janitor gently shifted into another piece. The transition was so smooth that many listeners did not even notice. The melody became more energetic. His fingers moved faster now. Still, every note sounded clean. Every chord landed perfectly. The audience watched in complete amazement. A businessman standing near the piano quietly laughed to himself. "I invested millions into tonight's event." His friend looked at him. And the most unforgettable moment came from the one person nobody expected. His friend nodded. Life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Not far away, one guest lowered his head. He remembered laughing when the joke was made. Now he felt embarrassed. He quietly placed his glass on a nearby table. "I judged him before he even touched the piano," he admitted to himself. Others were feeling the same. The laughter from earlier now seemed childish. The room had changed. Respect had replaced amusement. The billionaire stood only a few feet away from the piano now. He noticed something else. The janitor's hands showed signs of years of physical work. Small scars, rough skin, fingers that had spent countless hours cleaning, lifting, and repairing. Yet those same hands produced music with incredible grace. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One represented hard labor. The other revealed remarkable artistry. Somehow, both belonged to the same person. The final section of the performance began. The melody slowly became softer again. The audience leaned in. No one wanted to miss a single note. The janitor pressed the final chords with gentle care. Then the last note faded into silence. For one long moment, nobody moved. The ballroom remained completely still. It was as if everyone needed a few seconds to return to reality. Then someone started clapping. A single pair of hands echoed through the room. Another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom exploded into applause. People stood from their chairs. The applause grew louder and louder. Some guests even cheered. Others wiped tears from their eyes before clapping again. The hotel staff smiled proudly. The young waiter was clapping so hard that his hands turned red. "I knew he was kind," he said. "I never imagined he was this talented." The janitor slowly stood from the piano bench. He gave a small, humble nod. He did not raise his hands in celebration. He did not bow dramatically. He simply smiled with quiet gratitude. It was the smile of someone who expected nothing. The billionaire looked at him for several long seconds. He wanted to speak, but no words came. Everything he had assumed only minutes earlier had been proven wrong. The joke that had filled the ballroom with laughter had disappeared completely. In its place stood a deep silence filled with respect. As the applause slowly settled, an elderly guest in the front row suddenly took one careful step forward. His eyes remained fixed on the janitor's face. Then, in a quiet voice filled with surprise, he spoke words that made everyone nearby turn toward him. "I know that face," he said. "I have seen him before." Many years ago, the ballroom became silent once again. The applause slowly faded, but the silence that followed felt even louder. Everyone looked toward the elderly guest who had spoken. He took another slow step forward, never taking his eyes off the janitor. "I know that face," he repeated. "I'm sure of it." The janitor looked surprised but remained calm. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The billionaire watched with growing curiosity. "You know him?" he asked. The elderly guest nodded slowly. "I believe I do. Many years ago, I attended a music competition in another city. There was a young pianist who amazed everyone. He wasn't famous yet, but people believed he would become one of the greatest performers of his generation." Several guests leaned closer. The ballroom had become completely quiet again. "The way this man moves his hands," the elderly guest continued. "The way he pauses before certain notes, I have never forgotten it." The janitor lowered his eyes for a moment. "It was a very long time ago," he said softly. "So it is you?" the elderly guest asked. The janitor gave a small smile. "I suppose it is." A wave of surprise moved through the room. The billionaire stared at him. "You were a professional pianist?" The janitor gently shook his head. "I never became one. But you play like someone who spent a lifetime on stage." The janitor looked at the piano before answering. "I spent a lifetime practicing." Nobody interrupted him. His quiet voice carried more weight than loud speeches. "When I was young," he said, "music was everything to me. I practiced every day. My teachers believed I had a bright future." He smiled gently, remembering those years. "I entered competitions. I traveled whenever I could. Every performance taught me something new." "What happened?" someone quietly asked. The janitor remained silent for a few seconds. Then he answered, "Life happened. No one laughed. No one moved. My father became seriously ill. He could no longer work. My mother also needed care. There were younger people in my family depending on us." He looked around the ballroom. "I had a choice." His voice stayed calm. "I could continue chasing my dream, or I could go home and help my family." "And you chose your family," the elderly guest said. The janitor nodded. "They had already sacrificed so much for me. I couldn't leave them behind." Several guests quietly looked down. His words reminded them of sacrifices made by people they loved. "I found work wherever I could," the janitor continued. "Construction sites, warehouses, cleaning jobs, anything that helped pay the bills." "Weren't you angry?" a woman asked gently. "Didn't you feel your dream had been taken away?" The janitor smiled. "I won't pretend it was easy." He looked at his hands. "There were days when I missed the piano more than I can explain." He slowly touched one of the keys without making a sound. "But my family needed me more than the concert halls did. The young waiter standing nearby felt his throat tighten. He remembered complaining about working overtime only a week earlier. Now his own problems suddenly seemed much smaller. The billionaire remained silent. His confident expression had completely disappeared. He remembered laughing when the joke was made. Now that memory felt uncomfortable. One guest quietly asked, "Did you ever stop playing?" The janitor smiled again. "No." The answer surprised everyone. "I simply stopped performing." He looked around the ballroom. "Whenever I found a piano that no one was using, I would play for a few minutes. In empty hotel halls, in community centers, in old churches, sometimes just for myself." He laughed softly. Sometimes the audience was only a night security guard. Several people smiled. The image felt simple and honest. "I never played because I expected applause. I played because music reminded me who I was." The room became quiet once again. One of the hotel managers slowly walked forward. "I've worked with you for almost 15 years. The janitor nodded politely. "I never knew any of this. I never talked about it." "Why not?" The janitor thought for a moment. "Because everyone around me was carrying their own responsibilities." He looked at the hotel staff. "We all come to work to support ourselves and the people we love. My story wasn't more important than theirs." Those words touched many people. The billionaire slowly stepped closer. "I owe you an apology." The janitor looked at him kindly. "You don't owe me anything." I laughed. "You did. I judged you." The janitor nodded. "You weren't the only one." The billionaire lowered his head. "I should have known better." The janitor placed one hand gently on the piano. "We all make quick decisions sometimes. What matters is what we learn afterward." The billionaire looked up. There was no anger in the janitor's face. Only kindness. That made the apology even harder. One guest quietly began clapping again. Not for the music this time. For the honesty. Soon others joined. The applause was softer than before, but somehow even more meaningful. The elderly guest smiled warmly. "I knew talent like yours could never disappear." The janitor laughed. "My fingers became slower over the years." They certainly didn't sound slow tonight. The room filled with light laughter. This time nobody laughed at him. They laughed with him. A television reporter who had been covering the charity event quietly lowered her microphone. She whispered to her camera operator, "This story is bigger than the event itself." The camera operator nodded. "It reminds people not to judge by appearances." Nearby, several younger guests continued talking. "I almost walked past him without noticing." "I did too. I thought he was just cleaning." "He was. And yet he carried a gift none of us expected." The conversations spread across the ballroom. People no longer discussed expensive cars, business deals, or luxury vacations. They talked about second chances. They talked about hidden talent. They talked about respect. One little boy who had attended the event with his grandparents slowly walked toward the janitor. He looked nervous. "Excuse me." The janitor smiled. "Yes. I started taking piano lessons last year." "That's wonderful. I wanted to quit because it was hard." The janitor listened carefully. "But after hearing you play, I think I should keep practicing." The janitor's eyes became warm. "If music makes you happy, never stop learning." The boy smiled. "I won't." His grandparents thanked the janitor before leading the child back to their table. The billionaire watched the moment quietly. He realized that one performance had already changed several lives inside the ballroom. Not because it was perfect, but because it carried truth. The event organizer finally walked toward the billionaire. "What should we do now?" The billionaire looked at the crowded ballroom. Every guest was still focused on the janitor. The scheduled program no longer seemed important. He smiled. "I think tonight has already given everyone something far more valuable than what we planned." The organizer nodded. "What would you like me to announce?" The billionaire looked at the janitor for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Ask him if he would honor us with one more performance." The organizer walked toward the piano with a hopeful smile. The janitor looked surprised as the request was made. He glanced around the ballroom. Hundreds of faces looked back at him, not with laughter this time, but with genuine admiration. For the first time in many years, he realized these people were not asking because of a joke. They truly wanted to hear him play again. The janitor looked around the ballroom. Every face was turned toward him. Just a short while ago, many of these same people had laughed when someone joked about him playing the piano. Now their expressions were completely different. There was respect, curiosity, and even hope in their eyes. He stood quietly for a moment. "I don't usually perform for crowds anymore," he said with a gentle smile. The billionaire stepped closer. "I understand," he replied. "But if you are willing, it would be an honor for everyone here." The room remained silent. No one wanted to pressure him, yet everyone secretly wished he would say yes. The janitor looked at the piano once again. "It has been many years since I played more than one piece in front of people." He paused before continuing. "But tonight has already become a very special evening." He slowly nodded. "I'll play one more." A smile spread across the ballroom. People softly applauded, careful not to interrupt the quiet moment. The janitor sat down once again. This time there was no laughter, no whispering, no phones being raised in a hurry. Many guests simply wanted to experience the music without looking through a screen. He rested his hands above the keys. For several seconds he remained completely still. The ballroom felt peaceful. Then the music began. The opening notes were gentle, almost like someone remembering a happy day from long ago. The melody slowly grew stronger. Every note seemed to tell part of a story. Some moments sounded joyful. Others carried quiet sadness. It felt like hearing the journey of an ordinary person who had faced difficult times but never allowed kindness to disappear. The audience listened without moving. One guest quietly reached across the table and held his wife's hand. Neither of them spoke. The music said everything they were feeling. The billionaire stood near the piano. This time he did not watch the audience. He watched the man playing. He noticed the calm expression on the janitor's face. There was no sign of pride. No sign that he wanted attention. He simply looked grateful to touch the piano again. That realization stayed with the billionaire. He had spent years believing that success meant standing above others. Yet the person who impressed him the most that evening was someone who had never tried to impress anyone. The melody became brighter. Several hotel employees smiled at one another. One of the reception workers quietly whispered, "He looks happier than I've ever seen him." Another employee nodded. "It's like this piano has been waiting for him." Near the back of the ballroom, a photographer slowly lowered his camera. Instead of taking pictures, he simply listened. "I don't want to miss this," he whispered. His assistant smiled. "Some moments are better remembered than photographed." The performance continued for several more minutes. Every part of the melody felt natural. Nothing sounded rushed. Nothing sounded forced. When the final note finally faded into silence, no one clapped right away. The room stayed completely still. People wanted to hold on to the moment for just a little longer. Then applause filled the ballroom once again. This time it lasted even longer than before. Guests stood from their seats. Some smiled through tears. Others simply kept clapping. The janitor stood and gave a small bow. "Thank you," he said quietly. The applause slowly settled. The billionaire walked toward him with careful steps. Instead of speaking immediately, he extended his hand. The janitor accepted the handshake. "I'm grateful you played tonight," the billionaire said. "So am I," the janitor answered. "I never imagined this evening would turn out this way." "Neither did I." The billionaire took a slow breath. "I owe you another apology." The janitor smiled gently. "You've already apologized." "I know. But I also want to apologize in front of everyone." He turned toward the audience. A microphone was brought to him. He looked across the ballroom. "When tonight began," he said, "I laughed because I judged someone by his uniform instead of his character." The room became quiet. "I believed I knew who he was without speaking to him." He looked toward the janitor. "I was wrong." Several guests lowered their heads. They remembered laughing too. "I think many of us learned something tonight," the billionaire continued. We spend so much time noticing titles, expensive clothes, and important positions that we sometimes forget to notice the person. The audience applauded softly. The billionaire handed the microphone to the janitor. He hesitated before accepting it. I don't have a speech prepared, he said with a smile. A few guests laughed warmly. I've spent most of my life working ordinary jobs. He looked around the room. And I have learned something important. He paused. Every person you meet is carrying a story that you cannot see. The ballroom remained silent. Some stories are filled with success. Some are filled with disappointment. Some are still being written. He smiled kindly. So before deciding someone's worth, take a little time to know them. His words were simple. That made them even more powerful. The audience applauded once more. Among the guests was a woman who worked with a community music program for children. She quietly approached after the applause ended. I hope you don't mind me asking, she said. Not at all. We teach children whose families cannot afford private lessons. The janitor listened carefully. They would love to meet someone like you. He looked surprised. Me? Yes. They need someone who understands that dreams can survive difficult times. He smiled. I would be happy to visit. Her face lit up. Thank you. A few minutes later, another guest approached. He managed a small concert hall. If you ever wish to perform again, our stage is always open. The janitor politely thanked him. Then another person arrived. A retired music teacher wanted to shake his hand. Another guest asked if he would speak to young musicians. A local newspaper reporter requested an interview. The attention continued to grow. Yet the janitor answered everyone with the same quiet kindness. He never acted as though he deserved special treatment. The billionaire noticed that too. As the evening continued, the charity auction finally began. Something unexpected happened. The atmosphere in the ballroom had completely changed. Guests who had planned to make small donations now raised their offers. One businessman doubled his original pledge. Another family made the largest donation they had ever given at a charity event. The organizers could hardly believe what they were seeing. During a short break, one donor explained why. Tonight reminded me why helping people matters. Another guest nodded. We never know how much talent or hope is waiting for someone to receive a chance. By the end of the auction, the charity had raised far more money than anyone expected. The organizers celebrated quietly. They knew the reason. It was not because of expensive decorations. It was not because of famous guests. It was because one unexpected performance had opened people's hearts. As the evening came to an end, guests slowly began leaving the ballroom. Many stopped to thank the janitor before walking out. Some shook his hand. Others simply smiled and wished him well. The little boy who loved piano returned with his grandparents. I practiced before coming here, he said proudly. The janitor smiled. I hope you'll practice again tomorrow. I will. And one day, the janitor said, you won't play to impress people. The boy looked curious. Then why should I play? The janitor gently touched the piano. Because music should first make your own heart happy. The boy smiled. I'll remember that. As the ballroom slowly emptied, the billionaire remained standing beside the piano. He watched the janitor place both hands gently on the closed lid for just a second before preparing to return to his cleaning cart. The billionaire realized something. A man with extraordinary talent was about to return to sweeping floors as if nothing unusual had happened. He knew he could not allow the night to end without offering something that might change the janitor's future forever. The ballroom had almost emptied. The bright lights were still shining, but the excitement of the evening had begun to settle. Hotel employees quietly collected dishes, folded tablecloths, and moved chairs back into place. The janitor picked up his cleaning cart as if it were any other night. He smiled at a few coworkers and thanked them for their kind words. You were incredible, one waiter said. The janitor laughed softly. I only played a little music. A little? Another employee replied. You changed the whole evening. The janitor simply smiled and continued walking. Before he reached the hallway, the billionaire called after him. Would you wait a moment? The janitor stopped and turned around. Of course. The billionaire walked toward him without reporters or photographers following behind. For the first time that evening, they were simply two people talking. I've been thinking, the billionaire began. So have I. I don't want tonight to become just another story people forget next week. The janitor listened quietly. I believe your gift should be heard by more people. The janitor looked down for a moment before answering. My gift has already served its purpose. What do you mean? It reminded a room full of strangers not to judge too quickly. The billionaire smiled. That is true. But I think it can do even more. The janitor remained silent. I'd like to help arrange a public concert. The janitor looked surprised. A concert? Yes. No jokes. No tricks. No publicity to embarrass you. Just people coming to hear beautiful music. The janitor took a slow breath. I haven't stood on a public stage in many years. I know. And I understand if you're nervous. The billionaire paused. But I think many people would leave inspired after hearing your story. The janitor thought carefully before answering. I'll agree to one condition. Anything. The concert should raise money for children who cannot afford music lessons. The billionaire smiled immediately. I was hoping you would say something like that. They shook hands. This time, the billionaire said with a smile. I know exactly who I'm shaking hands with. The janitor laughed. And who is that? A man who reminded me that success without humility means very little. The following morning, life at the hotel returned to normal. Guests checked out. Employees greeted visitors. The janitor arrived before sunrise, just as he always had. He swept the entrance, polished the windows, and watered the flowers outside. Nothing about his routine had changed, but something around him had. People noticed him now. Guests smiled when they passed. Employees greeted him with even greater respect. Several people who had attended the charity event stopped by simply to say hello. One elderly guest brought him a small notebook. I thought you might like this. The janitor opened it. Inside were handwritten messages from many guests. Each page contained words of thanks. Your music reminded me of my father. You inspired my daughter to continue practicing. Thank you for teaching us not to judge. I haven't felt this hopeful in years. The janitor slowly closed the notebook. His eyes became slightly wet. I'll treasure this, he said. Later that afternoon, the billionaire returned to the hotel carrying several folders. I've spoken with a community theater, he explained. They're happy to host the concert. The janitor looked at the papers. They're offering the hall free of charge? Yes. And several local musicians have volunteered to help. The janitor looked amazed. So many people? The billionaire nodded. Your performance reached more hearts than you realize. News about the unusual evening had quietly spread throughout the city. Not because of advertisements. Not because of expensive promotions. People simply shared the story with friends. A janitor surprised an entire ballroom. You have to hear what happened. His music made everyone stop talking. The story traveled from one person to another. Soon local newspapers wanted interviews. Radio stations asked questions. Community groups invited him to visit. The janitor politely accepted only a few invitations. He still worked full-time. He still believed his responsibilities came first. One afternoon, while cleaning near the hotel entrance, he noticed a teenage boy standing outside. The boy looked nervous. Can I help you? The janitor asked kindly. I came to meet you. Me? The boy nodded. I saw a video from the charity event. I've almost quit playing piano 3 times. The janitor smiled. I nearly quit many things in life. What kept you going? The janitor thought for a moment. I stopped asking whether I would become famous. The boy looked confused. I started asking whether the music still brought me peace. And did it? Every single day. The boy smiled. I think I understand. Before leaving, the teenager said something the janitor would never forget. I don't want to become rich anymore. What do you want? I want to become someone whose music makes people feel better. The janitor gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then you're already practicing for the right reason. Days later, the concert finally arrived. The community theater was completely full. Families, students, teachers, hotel employees, business leaders, and neighbors all sat together. There were no special seating areas. Everyone shared the same audience. Backstage, the janitor looked at the piano waiting beneath the lights. His hands were calm. The billionaire stood beside him. Nervous. A little. So am I. The janitor laughed. You aren't performing. I know. But I care about tonight. The lights dimmed. The audience became quiet. A host stepped onto the stage. Tonight is more than a concert. It is a reminder that talent can be found anywhere. It is also a celebration of kindness, perseverance, and second chances. The audience applauded warmly. The janitor walked onto the stage. There were no expensive introductions. No dramatic music. Just quiet respect. He sat at the piano. For a brief moment, he looked across the audience. In the front row, he saw the hotel staff smiling proudly. The young waiter gave him a thumbs up. The little boy from the charity event waved excitedly. The elderly guest who had recognized him smiled warmly. The billionaire simply nodded. The janitor smiled back. Then he began to play. The music flowed through the theater with the same warmth that had filled the ballroom days earlier. People closed their eyes. Some smiled. Others quietly wiped away tears. The performance lasted almost an hour. Each piece carried a different emotion. Hope, gratitude, loss, joy, forgiveness. When the final note ended, the audience rose to its feet. The applause continued for several minutes. Not because they had witnessed perfection, but because they had witnessed honesty. After the concert, the organizers announced the results. The event had raised enough money to provide music lessons and instruments for dozens of children who otherwise could never have afforded them. The audience applauded once again. The janitor looked toward the children gathered near the stage. He smiled. This, he whispered to the billionaire, is the best applause I've ever received. The billionaire looked around the theater. I've attended concerts all over the world. He paused. But I've never left one feeling richer inside. As people slowly made their way home that evening, many carried more than memories of beautiful music. They carried a lesson they would remember for years. A person's uniform could never tell the whole story. A simple act of kindness could change someone's future. And sometimes, the greatest gifts remain hidden until someone finally takes the time to listen. The janitor quietly looked at the empty stage one last time before turning toward the exit. He believed the most meaningful chapter of his life had already been written. He had no idea that an even greater surprise was waiting for him in the days ahead. The days after the charity concert passed more quietly than anyone expected. The janitor returned to the hotel before sunrise every morning, just as he had done for many years. He unlocked storage rooms, checked the cleaning supplies, polished the lobby floor, and greeted the early staff with his usual warm smile. To him, life had not become more important because people knew his story. It had simply become busier. Visitors often stopped by the hotel hoping to meet him. Some only wanted to shake his hand. Others wanted to thank him for reminding them not to judge people by their appearance. Whenever someone praised him, he answered the same way. I'm thankful the music reached your heart. One morning, the hotel manager walked into the lobby carrying a large envelope. This arrived for you. The janitor looked surprised. For me, the manager nodded. It came by special delivery. The janitor carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a beautiful certificate, along with several handwritten letters. The first letter came from the community music program. It explained that the money raised from the concert had already been used to purchase pianos, music books, and lesson materials for children who had been waiting for an opportunity to learn. The second letter was written by a young student. It read, I never believed I could play music because my family could not afford lessons. Now I have my first class next week. Thank you for helping children like me. The janitor read the letter twice before quietly folding it. His eyes became wet. He smiled, but this time the smile carried deep gratitude. The billionaire happened to arrive at the hotel that same morning. He noticed the letter still in the janitor's hands. Good news. The janitor nodded. The best kind. He handed him the letter. The billionaire read it slowly. When he finished, he looked up. I've signed many business contracts in my life. He smiled gently. But nothing I've ever signed has made me feel this proud. The janitor laughed softly. Sometimes the greatest rewards don't come with money. I've started learning that. A few days later, the billionaire invited the janitor to lunch. Not at a luxury restaurant. Not in a private club. Instead, they ate together in the hotel's employee dining room. The cooks were surprised to see the billionaire standing in line with everyone else. One of the kitchen workers whispered, "He could eat anywhere." Another replied, "Maybe that's exactly why he's here." They carried their trays to a simple table. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. Finally, the billionaire spoke. "I've been thinking about the joke from the gala." The janitor smiled. "The one about marriage?" "Yes." I laughed louder than anyone. The janitor chuckled. "I remember. I wish I could take those words back." The janitor looked at him kindly. "If you could erase every mistake you've made, you might never learn from them." The billionaire nodded. "That's true. I don't remember your laughter anymore." "You don't. I remember your apology." Those words stayed with the billionaire for a long time. He realized that people are not remembered only for their mistakes. They are remembered for what they choose to do afterward. Over the next several months, something wonderful began to happen. The scholarship fund continued to grow. People who had heard the story started making donations. Some gave large amounts. Others gave only what they could. Every contribution mattered. Soon, children from different neighborhoods were receiving music lessons. Some learned piano. Others chose violin, guitar, or singing. The janitor visited the classes whenever he had free time. He never called himself a teacher. He simply sat beside the students and encouraged them. One afternoon, a little girl looked frustrated after making several mistakes during practice. "I'll never get it right," she said. The janitor smiled. "Do you know how many wrong notes I played when I was learning?" She looked up. "How many?" "I stopped counting." She laughed. "Really?" "Of course. No one begins by playing beautifully." He pointed toward the piano. "Every good musician has first been a beginner." The girl took another deep breath and started practicing again. Months passed. The hotel lobby slowly became known for more than comfortable rooms and excellent service. Guests often asked about the janitor whose music had inspired so many people. The hotel placed an old upright piano in one corner of the lobby. A small sign beside it read, "Music is for everyone. If you wish to play, please do." Many guests sat down and tried. Some played simple songs. Others only knew a few notes. Children laughed as they practiced. Families gathered around. The piano became a place where strangers smiled at one another. The billionaire visited one afternoon and watched a young boy nervously play a short melody. When the boy finished, everyone clapped. The billionaire smiled. He turned to the janitor. "You started something much bigger than a concert." The janitor shook his head. "No. What do you mean?" "I only reminded people of something they already knew." "And what is that?" "Every person deserves to be seen with respect." The billionaire nodded quietly. He could not argue with that. Toward the end of the year, the city organized a community celebration. The organizers wanted to honor people who had made a positive difference. Many expected famous business leaders or public figures to receive the highest recognition. Instead, the final award went to the quiet hotel janitor. When his name was announced, the audience stood and applauded. He walked onto the stage wearing the same simple smile he always carried. The presenter handed him the award. "You have inspired thousands of people," the presenter said. The janitor looked at the audience before speaking. "I never expected any of this." He paused. "I only hope that after tonight, you will notice the people you usually walk past." The audience listened carefully. The cleaner, the waiter, the security guard, the gardener, the driver. Every one of them has a story. He smiled gently. And sometimes the most extraordinary stories are hidden behind the most ordinary uniforms. The audience rose to their feet once again. When the celebration ended, the billionaire quietly walked beside him. "I've been wondering something. What is it?" If that joke had never been made, he looked toward the evening sky. "Would any of us have discovered your gift?" The janitor thought for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe not. What matters is that people listened when it finally mattered." The billionaire nodded. "I'll never judge someone by their job again." The janitor laughed softly. "That's worth more than any applause." Years later, people still remembered the evening when a room full of wealthy guests expected a joke, but discovered something completely different. The story was never really about a piano. It was never really about a billionaire. It was never even about a remarkable performance. It was about kindness replacing pride, respect replacing assumptions, and humility proving stronger than wealth. The hotel remained busy, and the piano in the lobby continued welcoming anyone who wished to play. Children who had received scholarships grew into confident musicians. Some returned years later to teach the next generation. The billionaire continued supporting the program, never asking for recognition. As for the janitor, he kept living much as he always had. He still greeted people with a smile. He still believed every job deserved dignity. And whenever someone asked him what the greatest moment of his life had been, he never mentioned the standing ovation or the awards. Instead, he would quietly smile and say, "The greatest moment was seeing a child believe in themselves because they realized that dreams do not belong only to the rich or the famous. They belong to anyone willing to keep learning, keep working, and never stop believing." And that was the lesson people carried home long after the music had faded.